Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you happen to find yourself in. Today, it is a great pleasure to be able to introduce everyone to G. Edward Griffin, who is the author of a book that I read 25 years ago now, I guess, and was absolutely captivated. And when I started this channel, one of the things that I hoped to be able to do was to be able to get to interview people like G. Edward Griffin. And so, Mr. Griffin, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone in our audience and say hello?
Yeah, well, hello. We'll start with that one. Nice to be on your program, Scott. Who am I? That's a good question. It depends who you talk to, I suppose. But you asked me to answer the question. All right. I'm just a guy that became interested in pretty serious issues at a young age. By young, I don't mean as a child or a teenager. I was married and had children. I was climbing the corporate ladder, actually, in my early 20s. I thought I was going to be the president of a large corporation or vice president, maybe live in a penthouse in New York City, have lots of expensive stuff, like a lot of young people do, because that's what we're sort of born into, that kind of a materialistic society, and you absorb it because you're too young to understand that there might be something better, and so you just absorb what's around you. But at about that stage, I stumbled across some things that concerned me, and I discovered by accident that I had a crusader gene that I didn't know I had. And I became very concerned about the future, not only my future, but or the future of my family, but the future of our country and the future of the world. I didn't know that I really cared about those things until I started to look at some of the events that were going on. This was back in the 1960s. And I could project that into the future. And I could see that this is not looking good. All my dreams and schemes for, living the good life and having freedom to do what I want to do and travel and learn things. I thought I wanted to get out and see the world. I thought I'd get rich and be able to have my own means of transportation, all that stuff. I said, all of that was going down the drain. I could see that if we didn't reverse these trends that I saw in those days, which the trends, of course, were the growth of government power. And along with the growth of government regulations and control comes the other side of the coin, which is the diminishing of individual freedom. When you have more controls, that means you have less freedom. And I could see these two charts sort of moving against each other, and I could mentally plot it out into the future. And I could see that if we continued on that path we were on, in my lifetime, we would see that government power would have grown to 100% and personal liberty would have diminished to 0%. In other words, I could see that our world and our society was moving back into the Middle Ages, where it was sort of a slave-master relationship. You either were in charge or you served. There was nothing in the middle. So once I got that picture, I discovered I had this crusader gene, and I quit my job with the corporation. My poor wife almost had a fit. She said, "What are you doing? How are we going to put food on the table and all this stuff?" And she was right. I had no idea. But anyway, being a fool that I was, I said, we've got to do something about this. And so from that point forward, Scott, I became interested in communicating what I had learned with other people. I started giving a lot of presentations, public presentations, and then I decided that I would make some very low budget documentary films, what I could afford. And I was somewhat trained for communications because that's what I did in school. I majored in communications. I had worked my way through school as a radio announcer, and when I came out of school, I went into television as an assistant TV director and all that kind of stuff. I thought I was going to be in, entertainment communications, but now I saw a better application for what I had learned, and that was to communicate ideas about what's going on in the world. So from that point forward, it's just a steady downhill fall, you might say, as I got deeper and deeper and learned more and more. and became more and more dedicated to get the truth out. So I wrote several books, as you know. I wrote the one that you're talking about, The Creature from Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve, which is really, the money system is at the core of all of these things. And I wrote a book on cancer research and therapy, because I had discovered there that you think there was fraud and deception going on in the money system. When do you take a look at the healthcare system? And we're, in both cases, we're sort of inclined to think, oh, well, everything is wonderful. I mean, these healthcare, right? They really care about us, don't they? We never dreamed that it was a business, and that actually it was better for us not to be well, but to constantly be sick in order to make more money for the pharmaceutical industry. That thought never crossed our minds. And if somebody had said it, we said, oh, what kind of a conspiracy theorist are you? And the same thing, is true in money. Oh, surely the government's taking care of our money supply, aren't they? And nobody would use that power to their own personal advantage, would they? I know it's a lot of naive things like that. So anyway, to wrap this up, Scott, it was a long journey. Ever since then, I'm still on that journey, discovering more and more things as I go. And about 2012, I guess it was 2011, we decided we were going to put on something called the Red Pill Expo, because all of this perfectly fits the red pill meme. And I think most people know that, take the red pill, buddy. Take, friend, wake up to reality, get out of your illusion, see life the way it really is. So we started the Red Pill Expo, and then we put the foundations in for the Red Pill University. And we have Freedom Force International. We got all these things going, something for everyone, because everyone needs to get involved in this battle. And that's the story of my life. And here I am at this point, feeling I better hurry up, because the world hasn't been saved yet. And it's my job to do so.
Well, I appreciate you in the pursuit of that. That's a noble goal. One thing that I'm very curious about, Mr. Griffin, is when you began, since the creation of the Federal Reserve was done in such a secret way, how were you able to uncover in your research how that actually came to be?
Well, it's an interesting question, and the answer is very instructive, I think, because there are a lot of things like that are done in secret, or let's say, if you don't want to call them secret, let's say the confidentiality level is extremely high. But in almost every case, there is a trail, and you don't have to discover the Rosetta Stone or anything like that. In the case of the Federal Reserve, everything that I discovered, I found in the main library. It's all found there in pages of the Congressional Record. It's found in the books, the memoirs, the diaries of the people who participated in the events. It's found in essays. It's found in other books done by other researchers who have found tidbits of history and documented them. And so if you're willing to spend a little bit of time and you're motivated to not be in a rush and not to jump to conclusions, and don't take anything for granted, question both sides of everything, because often even we ourselves don't know it, but we sometimes are biased, and we'll favor our interpretation of an event in history to favor our preconceived idea. We try not to, but it happens. So if you're willing to take time and to question even yourself on everything, it's not difficult. It just takes time. And all of these documents suddenly wind up crossing your path. People find out that you're doing the work, and they'll send things to you in the mail and say, do you have this book? Or did you know about this? Oh, no, I didn't know about that. Tell me more. So that's how it happens. There's no really secret to it. It's not a magical thing. It's just that once you start on the journey and you really commit your time and your full attention and your life, literally, to digging out everything there is to be found, you'll find it. And it's usually not buried too deeply. You can find it pretty easily.
Well, I just admire your stick-to-itiveness in that pursuit before really the internet was as prominent as it is, because today we can spend as much time doing as much research by Googling But when someone had to actually get up and go to the library to begin to try to do this kind of thing was just a whole different kind of world. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. And of course, that's a good and a bad thing both. Yes, back in those days, I spent most of my life in the Los Angeles Public Library in front of their machines, where the microfilm machines. And if you wanted to see something, if you wanted to examine the New York Times or the Washington Post or Time Magazine or look any of the documents of the day, you'd have to go down, and either they would have physical copies in their archives, and you'd have to order them up and wait till them come delivered, and then you have to go through them. Or you could go to their microfilm department and see if they had microfilmed these things. Usually they had, the older ones. So it'd be a roll of film about this big around, 35 millimeter film. You take it to the microfilm reader, you thread it through the little winder, and then you start winding and cranking the film, and the projector throws the image on a big flat white piece of mat that you look at. And there you can go whiz, and these pages go flying by, and you can see history just go zooming by, but there's no index. You just have to read everything and look at headlines and, what was that again? Back it up. Letter to the editor. What is that? Oh, that's no good. Here's what is he talking about? Isn't that interesting? And then you make notes. Yeah, it was very slow and tedious, but it was all there. That's the point. It's all there. It's still there. Now, today, in probably 5 minutes on the internet, I can find things and document them in a quantity. Let's say it would take me in 5 minutes, I could probably find what would sometimes take me 5 weeks to locate at the library. That's it's a huge advantage because you can index it. Look for a word, and all of a sudden you find everything that's ever been indexed around the world based on those combinations of words. And that's an amazing advantage. Now, the disadvantage is, we're seeing that now, everything is digited. People don't have paper documents or film documents. And so a person that has a document that is, let's say, embarrassing to authorities who have the ability to change what's on the internet, suddenly that piece of information disappears. It's gone forever. And they can actually rewrite it and change it so that it doesn't say what it originally said. Now it says something else. And so we're living in an age of George Orwell's 1984 and the memory hole. And so that's terribly disconcerting. And people don't read real books anymore. They don't have libraries in their homes, but they got their little Kindles. What they don't realize is what they see in that Kindle tomorrow might not be the same as it is today. There are people who have an interest in changing history. So it's good and it's bad. It's very convenient, but like so many convenient things, like food, for example, the old-fashioned way, the hard way, is much, much better.
Well, yeah, I think all of our food being packed with chemicals kind of rolls into the pharmaceutical industry. If we eat a really poor diet, then we're going to have more need for their medicine, and then we can just keep paying them over and over and over and over. It's kind of a neat little mousetrap they got there.
Yeah, true.
So as far as money goes, one of the things, I got a communications degree from Appalachian State University, not economics, not finance, not history. But then one thing that really jarred me, I've always been curious, and again, I had read your Jekyll Island book, but one thing that really jarred me was that movie, The Big Short. And I mean, when I saw that, it was like, I mean, do we have the inmates running the asylum? I mean, what is really going on here? And then, Mr. Griffin, the thing that has been the most disturbing since then is that for the last 12 years, it doesn't look like that we've got anyone except the inmates running the asylum and trying to run it into the ground as fast as they can. Do you think that I have reason for concern in looking at it that way?
I think you have understated the problem immensely.
That's one way of looking at it. I mean, the one thing too that just astounds me is in my research, I found a chart of all of the asset classes in the world. And you've got this tiny little one that is all the silver in the world. And then one that gets a little bit bigger with hard currency and dollar bills and whatever paper currency that governments have printed. And then you get down to the derivatives, and it has grown to between 545 trillion and 1.2 quadrillion. And I'm telling you, for a North Carolina boy, it is hard to even begin to see if I wanted to be able to wrap my head around just how big 1.2 quadrillion dollars is. And do you see any method to the madness of what our financial system in the world has been up to?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that sort of is a secondary message or theme in my book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. As I see it, the money cartel, which is what the Federal Reserve really is, it's a banking cartel, was created in its heyday in 1913. It was passed into law. It was created primarily as a means of making money and making it easily and making it on the backs of the taxpayers. It was it had some altruistic features to it. I mean, at least they spoke about, stabilizing the economy, which never happened, and protecting the purchasing power of the common man, which never happened. A lot of that they had to say that was their goal, but cartels always have only one goal, and it has nothing to do with the people. All cartels are concerned totally 100% with the advantages of the members of the cartel, period. So once you understand that the Federal Reserve System is a banking cartel, then you can read these statements coming from the Fed, and when you're reading nonsense, when they start talking about how they're there to stabilize the economy and benefit America and all that stuff. That's not it at all. So I don't know, I got a little bit off the track there, but I'm back on track now. I think in that day, their primary motive was to get hold of the money creation power of the federal government. The Constitution and the constitutions of all countries, as far as I know, authorize the creation of money by the governments themselves. I'm not sure that's a good idea, by the way, but that's the way it traditionally has been. It's kind of a measurement of national sovereignty to be able to issue your own money system. Nothing wrong with that, but when they coupled that with the idea that you have to use that money whether you want to or not, legal tender laws say you will use this money no matter how terrible it gets and how badly we devalue it, and no matter how much it plunders you, you must use it because it's the law. When you put those two things together, then you've got a real problem. And of course, those two things are always put together. All governments create the money, which is good or bad, but when they create those legal tender laws and force their citizens to use that money, now it's definitely on the bad side. So in the beginning, the banking cartel wanted to get hold of that power to create the nation's money. And they did. That's one of the purposes of the Federal Reserve Act, was to transfer the power of money creation away from the federal government and into the hands of the private banking cartel. Most people don't realize that. But the banks got the legal power to create the nation's money. And if they think that the money is created by their government, they're totally wrong. It's created by the banks. Before that time, the money always said, this is a United States Treasury note or something like that. I always had the United States Treasury note. Mm-hmm. Now, if you notice, it says Federal Reserve note. There's a big difference. One is the government and the other is the banking cartel. People don't understand what those words mean. They don't understand the history of what happened on Jekyll Island back in 1910 and then feathered out till 1913 when the legislation was passed into law. So back to my point, in those days, it seemed to me as I was reading their memoirs and their speeches and their letters to each other, that was their primary goal, is to capture control of the nation's money issuance power. And then the next goal was to make it legal for them to create loans of money or to create money literally out of nothing. They can loan money that didn't exist, in other words. And in the act of loaning it, then it became into existence merely because it was loaned. But they didn't loan something that existed prior. When you borrow money from the bank, most of it, almost all of it, just didn't exist until you borrow it. And that's another thing people don't understand. It's part of the fraud in the system. Now, it does have some. You could argue it does have some advantages to be able to come up with money for projects and stimulate development and all that kind of thing. But there's a consequence to that act, and people are getting plundered and it's coming out of their purchasing power. And it's clear to me that the amount of harm that's done far exceeds the amount of benefit that ensues from it. So back in those days, it seemed to me pretty clear that they just had their eyes on getting hold of the financial system of the country, which they did. Now, in the years that followed that, it's also equally clear to me that they got maybe a little bit bored with just owning all the money in the world. Now they turn their attention to questions like, well, what are we going to do with all this money? There are only so many castles you can build, so many yachts you can have, so many jet aircraft. What are you going to do with? I mean, we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars. It's a river of gold just constantly flowing into the banks. What are you going to do with it? And so it's clear, as I say, to me, that suddenly these people who had everything in the way of material benefits and could buy anything decided to start buying people and buying their loyalties so they could capture control of political systems. Now, this is not a material possession they bought. Now they're controlling governments. They're controlling society. They're controlling human beings. So, looking at it from that perspective, all of a sudden people have all these people at the top of this financial pyramid have all the yachts and all the palaces and all of the summer resorts and all the servants that they really can use and plenty that they can't even use. So now what's next? And it's power over human beings, power over society. And so this is where most of that money now has been going for as long as I have been around. They're buying up loyalties of politicians and heads of corporations and institutions so that they can build what they fondly call the New World Order, with themselves, of course, in control. They think that people are too damn dumb to make decisions on behalf of their own personal destinies. And they're certainly too dumb to be able to make decisions on behalf of the nation. And so we've got to make these decisions for them, and they better follow these rules and regulations that we come up with because it's for their own good. You see, that's the argument that always gets thrown into it. And so the job from that point forward has always been to use this money to expand the control of government over ourselves and to reduce our liberties, and at the same time do it in such a way that the people will say thank you. And the way they do that is very, very clear. It's because they create crises. They create as much as possible. They have wars, they have famines, they'll have pandemics, they'll have terrorism, they'll have swarms of fraudulent investments that they could easily have cut down, but they don't. And they'll have violence in the streets, which they could easily stop, but they don't. Why? Because the worse the crisis is, the more frightened people become, and the more willing and more anxious they are to please save us. Can't you call martial law, for example? And of course, that's what they want to do, so that then they have an excuse to do all of this control over humankind. And most people, not understanding the ploy, will say, oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, sir. I'm so glad you did this. Now we don't have to worry about these things. Now just tell us what to do. And please, may we have some food?
With the advent, Mr. Griffin, of AI, do you believe that that's also a part of the fact that they would like to be able to have more of a surveillance society in this new world order, along with being able to track every purchase that everyone makes if they're pushing us into a digital currency world?
Well, the short and to me the obvious answer is yes. That's exactly what they're doing. They need all the technology that they can muster, because until this time, why haven't they done this before? They could have. There've been plenty of times in history where there was enough political power and enough military power to force the entire populations to do what they want them to do. And but military force and coercion like that genders a tremendous amount of resentment on the part of the slaves. And resentment is a very dangerous thing to have among the masses, because sooner or later there's going to be a revolution. Sooner or later there's going to be a revolt, palace revolt or something. If nothing else, the next despot who wants to take control of this wonderful mechanism will bring in a phony opponent, and have a revolution against the other opponent, so that now the new savior comes in, but he's a despot too. They play those games. But the whole thing I'm trying to say is that when the masses are discontented and angry at their leaders, and that's a very dangerous situation to have. So the game, ever since the French Revolution, has been, as I said before, how to convince the people to be grateful for being controlled. And that's where the fear comes in. So now if we have fear and we're going to have control in the name of protecting people from whatever it is they fear, AI comes in, surveillance comes in. You've got to monitor everybody. Say, you're not doing it. Put your mask on. We caught you without your mask. You stepped over the line. Oh, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be within 2 miles of your house. Now you were 3 miles. Do that once again, friend, and you don't get any. Your social credit score goes down, and you won't be able to buy anything in the stores for 6 months. See how you like that? You better do, this sort of thing. So yeah, it all ties together. You can control people by convincing them that it's all in their best interest. But after a while, even that begins to wear thin, right? We've seen a growing awareness today that this whole coronavirus theater is really phony. I mean, that there are no deaths. I mean, this thing is a nothing burger. And they talk about cases. Well, most people aren't informed enough to know the difference between a case and a death. A death is a death, all right? But a case is somebody, he's got a fever. Oh, that's a case. Well, we tested something, and something bleeped on this test, and it says positive. So that's a case. He's feeling perfectly well. Nothing wrong with him. And he probably doesn't even have anything except maybe he had a flu shot last year, and that's what it's triggering off. Who knows? But it's a case. And so they start talking about cases. We're going to have, so many more cases have been reported this month. Oh, what are we going to do? We'll lock everybody down. All of this sort of thing. So people are waking up to this fraud. So now how are they going to control them, you see? But that's where the surveillance comes in, because they've got to be able to detect when people start stepping out of line. They don't want people to get together in large groups. That's why this 6 feet apart, only 30 people in a meeting or less, only 5 people in some places, because once people get together, like those fantastic demonstrations that we reported on in London and in Berlin last week. I mean, there were tens of thousands of people. And I looked at those videos over and over again. In fact, we edited it down a little bit to get the highlights. I only saw one person with a mask on in those crowds. And they're all shouting and saying, hey, we're on to you guys. We know you're playing games with us. Get out of our lives. We want to go back to work. See, they don't want that, because that's the beginning of a pushback. That's the beginning of rebellion. So this is where technology comes in. That's my point. In the past, they haven't been able to monitor people and control people. But now with technology, they can detect instantly when somebody's beginning to group together and organize opposition. And they can nip it in the bud if they can do that. But if they wait until it turns into 1 million people or 5 or 10 million people, then it's game over.
Well, and there is also a positive into it, and it's interesting to see how they have framed the narrative, because again, the name of my show is the XRP Army News, and I'm a an advocate of Ripple and of XRP. And one of the things is I'm also a libertarian, and I recognize. I mean, I'm not a blind idiot. I see what the powers that be are doing, just like you do. However, if I can be able to position myself to be able to profit along with it, if they're going to do it anyway, because the cabal, the banking cartel, the New World Order organizers, Mr. Griffin, they didn't call Scott Powell up on the phone and say, "Hey, Scott, here's what we're going to do. Is that okay with you?" They didn't do. I didn't get that call. So if I can position myself to be able to profit for myself, that I'm interested in doing that. And part of the narrative that Bitcoin got and Mount Gox was it's all about the criminals. Well, if you really think about it, if they track every financial transaction that's made, it basically does away with fraud. How can the criminals launder money and do bad things in an economic system if every single transaction is tracked?
Easy, because it'll be the criminals doing the tracking. And they'll have an exemption, or they'll have a back door or something. That's always the way. Yeah, let's have the government control these bad things, and then the government does the bad things, and then you're stuck.
But more so, what I was referring to is like a drug dealer. If a drug dealer decides right now he can transact in cash, and there's no way anybody can know that happened.
Yeah.
And then if he wants to launder that money through a legitimate business that they set up, they can do that. But if the currency is all digital, there's no way that they can do that any longer.
Well, my point is this: that if you're worried about drug dealing and and money laundering, then the first thing you have to do is close down all governments and close down all banks. Because those institutions are the biggest money launderers and the drug money accounts in the world. I mean, let's face it. I mean, people should know this by now, that the CIA for years have been running most of the drugs, and they've been funding some of their government operations. Even, during the Sandinista era, when Colonel North was defending America against communism, and they said, where are you getting the money? Well, it turns out he was getting it from running drugs through South America. And that's when George Bush and the CIA got involved, and we were using military planes to transport drugs into Miami. I mean, who are the biggest drug dealers or channelers and the money launderers? And I say it, they're governments and they are the banks. And so they like to say, well, we got to clamp down. We got to know your customer and all that sort of thing. And they are the biggest offenders. So I don't even listen to that nonsense. It's just propaganda to get us to say, oh yeah, well, maybe it's a good thing. No. The point is this: if a criminal uses crypto to transfer his stolen money, is that any different than using a banking system or paying somebody in cash to transfer his stolen money? It's the same thing. The method by which a criminal transfers his funds or receives his funds is not anywhere near as important as how about getting rid of the criminal or stopping the crime. They would rather look at the method by which money is exchanged, because that would be to their benefit to get rid of have control over the system. But they only look at those things which benefit their agenda, and which is usually not effective in the first place. If they really wanted to stop drug smuggling, they ought to stop it themselves. And they also know who the biggest cartel leaders are. And don't tell me they couldn't put an end to that. They want that. I'll give you a little example. Let me finish my sentence. They want that problem. They want the crisis. Remember my statement before? Crisis is the stuff on which totalitarians thrive. I have a little place up in Central California. I've always wanted to get out and enjoy that part of the state. I was able to finally get a little piece up there. And after I got settled in up there, it's a little retreat. I was talking to my new neighbors, and he was showing me around some of the back hills and the roads. And he says, "By the way, I wouldn't go down there if I were you. That road there, he said, that's I'll show you on the tree. There's the mark of one of the gangs on the tree." And he said, "That they're serious. If you go down there, they'll kill you." I go, what's this? And this is maybe this is 5 miles from my little haven, I said, "Oh, they're no problem. But just don't go down there." They own that, they think. And they're growing pot down there. They got hot houses and all that stuff. And I said, "Well, why don't the police do something about this?" I said, "Did the police know about this?" He said, "Oh yeah, they know about it." I said, "In fact, they like it." I said, "What do you mean they like it?" Well, look, as long as that problem is down there, now everybody's afraid of it, and they have a justification for big budgets. They get their helicopter. They can hire extra people. They've got big expensive SUVs. They can put more people on the staff, because we've got this drug problem in the county. No, I said, "Well, why don't they bring the police up? And they know they got to come up out of this path you told me. And there's the road. And they could just pick them up as they come up out of there, couldn't they?" "Oh, yeah, but then the whole thing would be over. And what would happen to their budget?" So you got to realize this is reality. And it goes all the way up to the highest levels of government. Government thrives on crisis. And if you expect government to solve a crisis, you don't understand what's going on in the world. Governments are generally either at the cause of the crisis, or if one happens, they leap into it and try to make it worse so they can have better budgets, more power, and take away your liberty in the process. Crisis and fear are the tools of totalitarians. So when we come back to the cryptos, I don't see where cryptos are, or the dark web, or whatever you want to call it. What difference does it make? I mean, you can meet in somebody's back alley and call that the dark alley. All right. It doesn't make any difference whether it's an alley or a web. If you want to meet somebody in private, you ought to have the right to do it, whether you're a criminal or if you're not a criminal. Don't tell me the government, which is the worst criminal of all in these areas, telling me what I can and cannot do in the interest of fighting crime. Let's get realistic.
And how do you suppose that they could get different governments though? Because if we're moving and all of them are in favor of the world going into a digital currency, how do you get China and Russia and America all to agree, like to move in that direction in a new world order kind of a way?
Oh, because they're already in the New World Order. People keep talking about the New World Order as though it's something in the future. It's something in the present. And it's been in the present for quite a while. It's just a question of maturing and growing and expanding. All of the countries you mentioned are already in it. How do you get that to happen? They're already in it. It's just a question of picking up the phone or sending an emissary and saying, "Okay, friend, this is the next step." It's easy. I mean, these guys are committed to this global system of absolute control because they are the controllers. I don't care whether it's China or Russia or the US or France or Germany. I don't care. Mexico, it doesn't make any difference. At the top, not all of them, of course, but most of them, let's be clear on that. Most of them all are saying the same thing. That's how all of a sudden, all of the nations of the world were clamping down on this coronavirus theater, using the same phrases and the same rules and regulations. Somebody wrote those and passed them out and said, "Okay, guys, here's the next move." And it all happened that Monday at 9:00 in the morning, all over the world. The New World Order is here. This is not something we have to fight against developing in the future. We have to get rid of it now. So that's how it's already in place. It's just a question of sending out the orders.
And do you have any kind of a time frame on what you believe? And one of the things that I've looked into a great deal as well, Mr. Griffin, is what is going on with the International Monetary Fund, because America again is 27 trillion in debt on one side of the balance sheet, 153 trillion unfunded liabilities. So we've got some issues, but there are also 70 nations right now across the world that have requested help from the IMF And in history, since you're such a good student of history, in the past we have had debt jubilees that have sort of reset the economic balance sheet for every country to give kind of a fresh start. Do you believe that the IMF could end up being kind of like the World Bank in this new world order?
Well, absolutely. It always has been. That was its goal in the very beginning. Um, yeah, there's a slight difference between the IMF and the World Bank. The IMF is more like the central banks of the various states, and the World Bank is more like the lending department of the IMF. That's an oversimplification, but they're both different, really departments of the same operation. And what we see happening is a gradual amalgamation of all the central banks of the world into this one centralized. It'll be a central bank. It'll be the World Bank and the IMF. And it's always been the plan, and everybody understood that. They speak about those things in their conferences. They talk about the progress that is being made, and that maybe the year 2030 or 2035 will be the year, and these are the numbers they're throwing around now, might be the day when it's all finished. See, it's a work in progress. It's not something they're just going to do. They've been working on it for decades, piece by piece. So yes, you're absolutely correct. It's the United Nations is the structure, the intended structure for the political visibility part of the political structure, I should say. The real action, of course, is behind the scenes. Those are the meetings that take place at Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, for example, or at the Bilderberger meetings and things like that. But the visible part of it is there at the United Nations, and most people will not see beyond that. And yeah, it'll look like a wonderful thing because they're going to these currencies, as you've pointed out so well, cannot. They're already destroyed. It's just that most people don't realize it yet. There's no way that a house of cards that's literally a house of cards half a mile tall is going to stand.
Right.
It's amazing that it's still standing, but and it's probably still standing because there's little pieces of glue at every joint, in which case it's not really a house of cards. It's an illusion.
Right. Well said. So do you think that President Trump do you think that he is a part of what the cabal or whoever do you think that the powers that be who are kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes would rather see him get reelected or rather see Biden come in, or does it matter?
Well, I'm glad you gave me that third choice. It really doesn't matter, but I think they would rather see Mr. Trump come in. I think the powers that be want Mr. Trump to come in because he represents in the minds of most Americans the position of conservatism and sanity and American patriotism. And those are the people if I were on the other side, those would be the people I would worry most about in the final stages of trying to take away their last vestiges of their freedom. Those are the people that are going to be mad. So what do you do about it? If I were on the other side, I would give them a leader that I control, and I would have him put on a good show. And they'd say, well, this guy is, maybe he's not so hot, but look at the other guy. Oh, man, look at Hillary, look at Biden or whatever it is. And look at these people in the streets. And look at these maniacs. And I would put on a good show like that if I were running the opposition. And I would remember the game. The name of the game is fear, right?
Right.
If you remember that, this is the name of the game: crisis and fear. So fear will drive people to do really incredible things, illogical things, because they're afraid. And it's like, well, what else are you going to do? They've got to do something. And so it looks to me like somebody who is calling the shots is trying to create as much fear as possible in the minds of that conservative, patriotic, stable group. And they think, oh my God, Anything would be better than that, you know, the Democrat. And so even the last remnants of opposition to some of the policies that are being done by the Trump administration, the last remnants of opposition and criticism are just swept away by the fear of the other side. It's clear to me that the people calling the shots want Mr. Trump to be elected. And then after that, there'll be more violence and more violence. And finally, they'll be begging, please, please, martial law. And Mr. Trump has already told us that he's fully prepared to institute martial law. He said that. And people are saying, oh, thank God. You hear it already. Come on, let's get the president in so he can declare martial law, which is really what the other side wants. But if you have a controlled opposition like that, and your controlled opposition actually does the thing that you want, you have completely neutralized your opposition. That's what I suspect. I don't know that that's true. I hope I'm wrong. Lord, I hope I'm wrong. But everywhere I look, and with the passage of time, that scenario begins to look more and more plausible.
Well, I'm a libertarian, and so the loss of more freedoms is something that I'm not for. And I'm definitely, even as a libertarian, I'm definitely lean more to the Trump side. But I got to tell you, Mr. Griffin, if I was Joe Biden's campaign manager, every day I would wake up afraid he was going to say something that was kind of, bumbling, and then we would have to try to spin that in order to try to make it be okay. I mean,
yeah, but you see, you said if you were his campaign manager.
Yeah.
Well, what if his campaign manager was somebody from the other side? You'd say, good job, Joe.
Good job, Joe. I mean, look, I used to be a therapist at mental health. Both of my parents have worked in mental health before. And I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm trying to say that I think that the gentleman legitimately is suffering from dementia. And again, the Biden supporters, I don't understand, Mr. Griffin, how they can't see that he is obviously impaired.
Well, they do see it.
Vote for him or not.
I believe that everybody sees it. But the party loyals, of course, pretend like they don't see it. But everybody sees it. You have to be an idiot not to see it. And to me, I say it looks to me like that's the plan. I mean, he is impaired, and
Yeah.
those violent groups on the street, they may be all paid. Most their leaders are paid. They're on the payroll of Mr. Soros or maybe the deep state.
Right.
And as soon as the money stops, they wouldn't be in the streets doing that. It is theater. Looks pretty darn realistic, but it is theater. And so it's all staged. In other words, that's what I'm trying to say, which I liked your first comment. You said, if it makes any difference at all. Well, it does make a difference. I think in terms, as I said, if I were running the New World Order game plan, I would play it exactly as we see it now, because that's much better than having the radical violent left in charge, because then you get too much pushback from the conservatives. But if you have a so-called conservative doing it, oh, well, then you're disarmed. You're defeated.
Now, since you brought up the deep state, and one thing that I am sure that you have looked into somewhat, the purpose of our conversation is not really this direction, but I'm curious how you feel about it. Do you feel like that Miss Maxwell will make it to trial?
Oh. Well, I haven't really studied that in great depth for all the little eddy currents underneath it. But on the surface, it looks like she doesn't stand a chance. I mean, I would not insure that lady at all.
Well, I think there are a lot of very influential people that are in her little black book that are very, very uncomfortable right now. And when I look at what happened to Mr. Epstein, I mean, what a set of coincidences that had to fall into place in order for that guy to kill himself.
Well, it's hard for me to even fathom that anybody that's above the third grade would believe that he killed himself. I mean, if they know anything about the story. And yet the media plays it that way, because don't forget, the media is very much a part of this scenario. They're part of the theater. And that's why, when people say turn off your TV, there's another meaning to that. What you're seeing is theater. You're not seeing reality. It's more than just propaganda. I guess you could say it's more, because it's a conditioning of what is reality. And people look at their TV sets and all they hear is the same thing. Everybody's agreeing, right? Well, if everybody agrees, well, then it must be true. And it's that kind of thing. You just turn that thing off and look out your window. And, even though all the weathermen are saying it's raining like crazy outside, if you actually look out the window and see the sun shining, you'd say, well, wait a minute. I don't care how many weathermen are saying it's raining in Los Angeles right now. It ain't raining in Los Angeles right now, But people would rather look at the weather report on their TV screens rather than open the window and look outside.
Yeah, agreed. So as we begin to wind down, since you've had a breadth of experience in researching such a wide variety of things in the history of America and the history of humanity, I guess the one thing that I would like to know the most from you is, are you feeling positive about, being a human being right now? I mean, do you feel like that we're moving in the right direction? I'll let you know right up front that I'm a cockeyed optimist by choice. No matter what's going on, I just choose to feel that there's something positive around here somewhere. And have you ever heard that the little story about the little Johnny in the horse stall? There were two different kids, and one of them was just digging and digging and digging, and he was kind of a spoiled little brat, and he wasn't happy at all, and hated it all. And then there was in the other stall was a little kid, and he was just as excited as he could possibly be. And he was just shoveling and shoveling and shoveling. They asked him, why are you so happy? And he said, well, with all of this in here, there's bound to be a pony somewhere.
Yeah, I have heard that. That's a delightful story. And it's true. I think that you have to start looking for the pony at some time. But I'll go one step further and say that in your story, it's unrealistic. There's no pony. But in the real story, there is a pony. I mean, and let me explain it this way. I've always been concerned, I guess is the right word, because I saw this movement toward this totalitarian system that we're describing. I've been following it since 1960. And it's always been very slow and incremental. And we've all heard the story about the frog in the pot of water. You drop the frog into hot water, he'll jump right out. But if you put him in cold water and just gradually heat it up, he'll allow himself to be boiled. Yep. In societies, I think that's true. And I was concerned because I saw the world as a pot of boiling water, or the frog in the pot of boiling water. It was just moving kind of gradually. Every once in a while, there'd be a leap, like 9/11 or something. But then we go back, and I thought, if they just keep this gradualism up, the generations of the old folks would die off, the new ones come up, and they're going to get it, darn it. And now I think because they were concerned that there is an awakening happening, they made a mistake. They decided to unplug this coronavirus theater sooner than they should have. And it's working, I have to say that, but at the same time, it's jarring people. And people are coming out of the woodworks and say, what is going on? And I think it's the pony. I think there's a pony there. And so I'm very delighted to be living in these times where I can play a role in helping to accelerate that awakening. Because believe me, if they had slowed it down, it was very hard to see how you could turn this around. There are lots of stories and jokes about this. One guy, they say that he had this board and he was hitting a donkey with it. And his friend said, "What are you hitting the donkey for?" He said, "Well, if you want the donkey to do something, first you have to get his attention, you know." And well, society is kind of like that. If you want it to move, you got to get its attention. Well, what's happening now? If that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will. So I'm coming back to your question. I am not optimistic as you are, but I am very realistic about it. I think we have a fighting chance of turning this around if we really put everything we have into it. We can't go back to business as usual and say, "Well, I'm not available on Tuesday. I've got a golf game or something." Or, "Well, we've got a family reunion and this is very important." Well, it is very important, but my God, we're fighting for our lives now. We've got to get this issue on the front burner, the top front burner. And if we can do that and get the word out and keep at it, I am very realistically pleased with what is going on. And so that's why I'm on your program, by the way, instead of out drinking a bottle of wine saying, "Oh, what the difference does it make?"
Well, I'm very grateful that you look at it that way. And again, I believe as you do that we're waking up. I believe that part of what is going on, and I don't want to get too far out there, but I believe in the evolution of consciousness of humanity, that I believe that more people are waking up. And I believe that the internet has got a big part in that, because people who are beginning to be curious about things have the opportunity to be able to investigate things more fully. And
let me add something to that. The internet is a wonderful, wonderful thing, as we talked about before, but it has its pluses and its minuses. And the minus is that people need to get together. You can't turn this thing around looking at the internet and sending emails back and forth. You've got to get together face to face. That's why they don't want us to have meetings of more than 30 people. And it's for that reason that's one of the reasons we're putting on our Red Pill Expos. I'd like to take a moment to plug that, if I may.
Absolutely, please.
Yeah. We're putting on a series of Red Pill Expos, and the next one is coming up very soon. And so the date of it is October 10 and 11. Now, I hope you're sitting down for this, because it's going to be held at Jekyll Island. That's where the Federal Reserve System was conceived in great secrecy. And we're going there to undo the damage in some ways that was created by those guys. Jekyll Island, by the way, is a great place. It's a great resort island today. And there's a big conference center there, and you can go visit the room in the clubhouse, the Jekyll Island clubhouse, where the Federal Reserve was concocted and all that sort of thing. It's kind of historical. But the main thing is, people are coming from all over the world. We're getting reservations in, and we said, "Well, you see it, go to redpillexpo.org." And my little video statement up there in the top left-hand corner includes the statement that we've got to get out of our homes, and we've got to stand tall, and we've got to come together, and don't let them scare you. Just stand up and say, "No, I'm going out of my homes. I'm going to Jekyll Island. I'm going to meet with others. We're going to figure out what to do. We're going to form into groups. We're going to have strategies, and we're going to start programs, and we're going to get this person elected. We're going to get that person unelected. We're going to come away from our TV screens and off of our couches and start working together." And so this is the beginning, I hope, of a mass upsurge. It's what gives me that realistic optimism that you're talking about, because the orders are coming in. I get a call from Australia just yesterday, say, "Well, what if I bring 5 people? Can we get a little better price?" And I said, "You bet you can. If you're going to come all the way from Australia to here, we'll help out a little bit," and so forth. So it's happening. And so I urge you to tell your followers to go to redpillexpo.org. And of course, a lot of people can't make the trip no matter how much they want to. So there's going to be a live stream. And then we're forming local campuses in all the counties around the country. So there's a lot to do if you really want to do it.
And I'll make sure and put a link in the description of this video for everyone. And one thing that I'd like to also share as a shout out to our community is you know where the adoption curve is on cryptocurrency. The people in my community, we're early adapters. And so the level of people in our community who are waking up and the level of awareness in our audience and our community, I think you would be overwhelmingly pleased with how many people are waking up and are awake. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to be able to have you specifically on to be able to share with everyone, because where you know the mindset of early adapters.
Oh, yeah.
They've been out there seeking and looking and questioning everything, and that's
Mhm.
how they found cryptocurrency and Ripple and XRP in the first place.
Mhm. Yeah, and those are exactly the kind of people that, like I was, discovered that I was when I first felt my crusader gene vibrate. You know, I didn't know I was that kind of person. I thought I was the other kind. But boy, once you get a sniff of something that has principle to it, that has a possibility to change the course of history, it's exhilarating. You think, I want to be part of that. And so, yeah, those are the kind of people we're looking for. So they should be at Red Pill Expo, at least if not in person, by live stream. And we got plenty coming after that. So please ask them to check us out.
Well, I most certainly will. And one thing that I do signing off with every person that I have the opportunity to speak with is I always put out a invitation to come back at some point, and it's the 3rd of September. And if we got back together, I don't know what time period, and just kind of reflect back on, how things were that day and how things have progressed, I would love to be able to continue a conversation with you. And I can't tell you, you have been on my bucket list. When I saw you on a video on YouTube, and I said to myself, I'd love to be able to talk to that man. And I went and I found you on Facebook and put out that, just started taking action to try to see if I could make it happen. And then when it began to look like that it would, I mean, you've been on my bucket list. And if I can make it to Jekyll Island, I will, so I can shake your hand in person, even though the powers that be might not want us to shake hands. I would love to be able to do that. And it has been
Well,
truly an honor to be able to meet someone that I respect and admire as much as you. And I'd like to offer you a sincere thank you for coming on and having a friendly conversation with me.
well, thank you, Scott. I really appreciate that. And let me assure you that we'll have no trouble shaking hands on Jekyll Island.
All right, that sounds wonderful. Oh,
In fact, I have to tell you a little bit of backstory on that. I was talking to the people there a couple of weeks ago when we finally decided, yeah, we're going ahead with this. We're not going to wait around anymore and see what happens. We know what's happening. We don't want to wait and see what's happening. So I started calling people there, and I found out that the merchants there, they like us. They know all about us, and they could hardly wait for us to come. We're big fans of theirs. And the governor of Georgia is one of the few governors that's on record saying, no, we're not going to enforce all this, this lockdown and all this stuff. You don't have to wear a mask. We're not going to stand behind all that. So it's the right state. And Jekyll Island is owned by the state of Georgia today. And so the police there are the state police. And I found out that those guys are not the least bit interested or motivated in going up to people and say, oh, you better put your mask on. So it's a good place to go. Now, there's signs everywhere because those are the rules. You got to wear a mask to enter this building. Pretty much people just ignore it. So,
right. Well, Georgia has a very special place in my heart because my mother's side of the family is from South Georgia, Macon County. And my grandfather actually was a senator from Georgia. And my sister and mother and brother-in-law and their family lived near Athens. So I live in North Carolina, but I'm like a half Georgia, half North Carolina boy. So I'm glad that you're going to be that in that area.
Well, I'm going to be there. I've been in Macon once years ago. I remember it was very Georgian.
Very. my mother's side of my family is about 25 miles south of Macon in a little town called Montezuma.
Oh
Is
yeah.
where they were from. So yeah, but and it's Macon County as well. So I'm glad to know, and that's Jekyll Island. Is likely to be close enough for me to be able to see if I can get down there too. And I'd like to do that so I can meet you in person.
Good. Like to see you down there.
All right.
Thanks for having me on.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.